The MAGA meltdown over Bad Bunny headlining the Super Bowl halftime show is not letting up anytime soon. The NFL's decision drawing the ire of major right-wing commentators and influencers, and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem now confirming ICE agents will be in Santa Clara.
Yeah, we'll be all over that place. And we're going to enforce the law. So I think people should not be coming to the Super Bowl unless they're law-abiding Americans who love this country.
Well, joining me now is our friend Dominic Patton, executive editor for Deadline Hollywood. So, Dominic, you report ICE agents will be on the ground to harass the halftime show. And then we just heard Secretary Noem say, yep, agents are going to be there. What is fueling her position, and what is the reaction to her threats?
Ultimately, I think it comes down to three things from the MAGA world and the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. One, clearly a hatred of capitalism, because Bad Bunny is a big star and he's going to make a lot of money for the NFL because a lot of people are going to watch his halftime show at the Super Bowl. Secondly, ignorance. They might want to remember that Puerto Rico is part of America. And secondly, that Bad Bunny is one of the most popular artists in the entire world. And third, I think there's a little bit of a loser syndrome. You know, Bad Bunny recently, after completing a 40-show residency in Puerto Rico, said that he wasn't going to bring his world tour to the United States because he was worried that ICE agents would try to arrest some of his fans and swarm the arenas he was in. That clearly got under the skin of the Trump administration for someone flipping them the bird, essentially. And then the NFL, which it turns out is too big to bully. They and Jay-Z, who put on the halftime show with his Rock Nation, well, to quote a Jay-Z song, "Dirt off my shoulders," decided that they weren't going to be told what to do. MAGA, as you saw there with the Homeland Security Secretary, have determined that only law-abiding real Americans can come to the Super Bowl. They clearly don't know who watched the Super Bowl. It's everyone. It's a bad move. And interestingly, Alex, the White House, the press secretary of the White House said, actually, we don't have any plans for ICE people to be at the Super Bowl any more than we would at any other event. So a little bit of a kneecapping there.
So the NFL has not responded to the online outrage. Noem did have a harsh message. Listen to this.
They suck, and we'll win, and God will bless us, and we'll stand and be proud of ourselves at the end of the day, and they won't be able to sleep at night because they don't know what they believe, and they're so weak.
Yeah, they're so weak. So will the controversy impact viewership, do you think, of the halftime show next year? And what message is the NFL sending choosing Bad Bunny? Do you think the NFL anticipated the backlash?
I think the NFL don't care, Alex. The NFL are the NFL. They're the biggest game in town, literally and figuratively. I think this idea that the NFL are weak, well, people who talk like that maybe be showing their own weakness. The NFL, Donald Trump and MAGA have tried to break the NFL a number of times. Sometimes they've succeeded in crushing a bone or two. But in this case, and I think it's important to remember, this isn't just the NFL. This is Jay-Z and his Rock Nation, and I believe Apple Music support the NFL halftime Super Bowl show. They've decided they want the biggest artists. Big Bunny is one of the biggest artists. And being that Taylor Swift is an unlikely participant this year, for nothing else than she's marrying a major NFL player, Bad Bunny is a great decision. But let's also not be naive. The NFL and Jay-Z knew exactly what they were doing. They decided to poke the paper bear, and they did a very good job at it.
Sure did. As did you, coming on the show as always, my friend. Thank you so much, Dominic Patton.
I'm joined now by the New York Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. He is the Democratic leader in the House. Congressman, it's good to have you here. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Typically, when we talk about these shutdowns, there's activity. Our reporters at the House are talking about negotiations that are underway or might be happening. What's happening? Are there any high-level talks happening between Democrats and Republicans that look like they're aimed at ending the shutdown?
There are not at this moment, and that's unfortunate. The White House and Republicans have gone radio silent since the Oval Office meeting on Monday. It's because they wanted to shut the government down, and they don't want to provide health care to everyday Americans. Our fight is to make sure we continue to stand up to address the Republican health care crisis. Republicans thought that we would back down as a result of their deepfake videos, threats, project cancellations, and lies. But Democrats aren't going to bend. Democrats are not going to break, because we're standing up for the health care of working class Americans, middle class Americans, and everyday Americans.
I'm going to get down to some of the substance of this in a second, but the White House has been messaging that what you are asking for, you and Chuck Schumer are asking for, is public money to fund the health care of undocumented immigrants. So starting with the fact that that would be illegal under current law anyway, you talked about the fact that when you were in the White House talking to President Trump, you said less than a minute was spent on that particular topic. That seems to be central to their argument.
That's absolutely correct. In fact, that meeting in the White House lasted for over an hour, and it was probably around 10 or 15 seconds that was spent when Speaker Johnson raised the issue. Everybody else dismissed it because they know that's not accurate. Democrats are fighting to stand up for Medicaid and Medicare and our hospitals and nursing homes, our community-based health centers, and certainly to make sure that we extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits. As you pointed out, the law is crystal clear on this.
Yep.
Taxpayer dollars cannot be spent to provide health insurance to undocumented immigrants. And we're not trying to change that law, and they know it.
So let's talk about the other part of it, which you are trying to fix, and that is health insurance premiums. There's a lot of discussion about the number of people who will either lose health care or see their premiums increase. It's the same thing. In other words, it's not that somebody gets thrown off of health care. It's that if your premiums increase by the amount that they will increase, there are millions of Americans who simply will not afford health coverage. They will fall off the rolls and become uninsured again.
That's exactly right. And these are everyday Americans. You know, one example, a married couple that makes $85,000 per year currently may pay about $8,000 for their health insurance coverage throughout the 12-month period of time. That in and of itself is already far too expensive. But that couple that makes $85,000 a year could see their premiums increase to $24,000 a year. There is no way they can afford that. They're going to lose their coverage or be forced into medical bankruptcy. And as a result, if tragedy strikes, if illness strikes, if they face a significant health care situation, they're not going to be able to receive the treatment or the care that they need for themselves, for their family, for their children. And people are going to die as a result of this. That's why Democrats are fighting hard and standing up.
What's different about this time? Why is this? We've had, I think, 20 shutdowns since the mid-1970s. What's different about this one? I'll tell you, my interpretation is what's usually different is that everybody's kind of avoid the shutdown before we get there. In this particular case, this bragging by Donald Trump and Russell Vought about their ability during this shutdown to create a government that you can basically drown, a very small federal government, seems to be the goal.
Well, cruelty is the point as it relates to the Trump administration, and we've seen that from the very beginning on day one on January 20th. They made all these promises about lowering the high cost of living, but costs haven't gone down in the United States of America. They promised to lower costs on day one. Costs are going up. Inflation is going up. The Trump tariffs are making life more expensive. And now Republicans, on top of that, are continuing to gut the health care of the American people and are going to dramatically increase premiums, copays, and deductibles on tens of millions of Americans. Those that benefit from the Affordable Care Act tax credits, and those are working class and middle class Americans, but people all across the country, as a result of this health care crisis that Republicans have created, are actually going to experience increased health care costs as well, and that's unacceptable.
What is going on in the Democratic caucus? What kind of pressures are you under? Because there are some people who don't like the idea of a government shutdown. There are some people, including in the Democratic Party, who don't want to see the system of Congress broken any more than it already is. What kind of pressure have you got to, hey, Jeffries, go in and work this out versus hold your ground?
Well, we all share the view that we are ready and willing and able to sit down with anyone, anytime, any place, the White House, Republican leadership, to try to find a bipartisan path forward to reach a spending agreement that reopens the government. But it has to be a spending agreement that actually makes life better for the American people, improves the quality of life of the American people, and of course, decisively addresses the Republican healthcare crisis, which is crushing people in rural America, in urban America, in small town America, in the heartland of America, and in black and brown communities all across America. And there's unity in the House, in the Senate, amongst Democrats that this issue has to be addressed. The time is now.
So how long can that unity keep? Because at some point, one argument is that, look, this is a hardship for the people who are not being paid either to work or not to work. There's the argument that Donald Trump and Russ Vought say they're going to fire people, not just furlough them. On the other hand, there's the argument that they're going to do this stuff anyway. They wrote it all down in Project 2025. This is their plan. So if you give in, you're just giving them carte blanche. How do you think about this?
Well, we are going to continue to stand by our hard-working federal civil servants. And it's unfortunate that Donald Trump and Republicans have decided to now use them as pawns because of the Republican refusal to provide health care to working class and middle class Americans. At the same period of time, Ali, you make a very good point, and that's the reality. Donald Trump, Russ Vought, and this malignant crew that's part of this administration, they have been engaging in mass firing since January 20th. They've been doing it outside of the context of a government shutdown. And so to the extent that they're claiming that a government shutdown may force their hand, that's just pretext for something that they've already been doing. This is why it's important for us as Democrats, of course, to continue to hold the line on behalf of the American people, while also making it clear we'll sit down with the Republicans. We want to find a bipartisan path forward. It's always been done that way in the past when we found ourselves in the context of a government shutdown. But this administration is trying to bully us, and we're not going to be bullied.
So the process would be that you'd have some sort of negotiation. The Senate perhaps would get a bill passed. House Speaker Johnson told a reporter for Scripps News that even if the Senate were to reach a deal, he doesn't know if he'd actually let that go to a vote on the House floor. Let's listen together, and you can tell me about it on the other side.
I just want to be clear here. Are you ruling out putting up a compromise on the floor for a vote if the Senate reaches one?
I am right now because we sent a clean continuing resolution. There's no Republican priorities in the CR at all. It's a very neutral, simple, straightforward status quo.
All right, what's your reaction to that?
The House Republican partisan spending bill is a dirty piece of legislation that continues to gut the health care of the American people, and it's riddled with toxic right-wing Republican priorities because it's connected to a March spending bill that Democrats in the House uniformly rejected. And we rejected it significantly because of the fact that it was an attack on veterans, an attack on children, an attack on housing affordability, and certainly was an attack on health care at the time in in March of last year. And now they just want to continue that. So it's irresponsible in our view for Republicans in the House to continue to insist that they aren't trying to advance their own extreme right-wing priorities. Of course, that's what they're trying to do. They've been doing it all year. At the same period of time, it's also irresponsible that House Republicans continue to be on vacation throughout the country and the world. They canceled votes last week, and now they've canceled votes again this week because they're not interested in actually trying to find common ground in a common sense way. We are, so we can promote the common good, but it requires good faith acting on the other side of the aisle with Republicans, and so far they've been missing in action.
This hour with the alarming scenes coming out of Chicago and the surrounding area where the Trump administration has escalated its immigration crackdown. Officers were seen in riot gear, gas masks, and armored cars as protesters gathered yesterday outside a detention center. At times, there were confrontations with federal agents leading to a number of arrests. Those same agents have been seen in tactical gear, roaming the streets openly carrying guns in a show of intimidation. And then there was this early morning raid of an apartment building earlier this week that involved around 300 federal agents, including those rappelling down from a Black Hawk helicopter. As the Chicago Sun-Times reports, quote, armed federal agents in military fatigues busted down their doors overnight, pulling men, women, and children from their apartments, some of them naked, residents and witnesses said. Agents approached or entered nearly every apartment in this 5-story building, and U.S. citizens were among those detained for hours. Agents claimed the neighborhood was, quote, a location known to be frequented by Trinidad and Tobago members and their associates. But DHS, of course, gave no evidence to support that assertion, and authorities did not confirm that any of the people arrested were members of the Venezuelan gang. Joining us now is Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson. Mayor Johnson, thank you so much for coming. I want to start with the raid because for so long, the American people have felt safe in their homes from a lot of the things that are going around in the streets, whether it's these immigration raids or the Marines in LA or whatever. But this is coming to the front doorsteps of people in your community, in your city, who are American citizens, who no evidence has been shown that they are a part of Trinidad and Tobago or even any of the other folks that were in that building a part of that. Talk a little bit about what it is like for the people in that apartment building to feel so under siege.
Well, the tensions are certainly high in the city of Chicago. What the president is doing is absolutely dangerous and unconstitutional. But our position is clear. We're going to remain resolved and firm in our position to protect the rights of all of our residents. What you are describing is something that we have been warning about for some time, that there are a number of people, including the President of the United States of America, that have decided to declare war on poor people and on working people across the country. And this raid that you are describing was on the south side of Chicago, where black folks live. And it is evident that this is not about safety. It's not about deportation. This is about the President of the United States of America and his kind that are looking to stoke and foment chaos and fear within our streets of cities across America. But we're going to remain firm and we're going to fight back against this tyranny.
Mayor Johnson, Secretary Kristi Noem, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, was in your city yesterday, and she spoke to federal agents before they were unleashed on protesters. Listen to what she had to say.
So today when we leave here, we're going to go hard. We're going to hammer these guys that are advocating for violence against the American people. What they are doing is advocating to harm not just you and your colleagues, but your families. And they're doxing your identities and victimizing people every day by the way that they're talking, speaking, who they're affiliated with, who they're funded with, and what they're talking about as far as consequences for what we're doing by protecting this country.
So two-part question, Mayor Johnson. One is what she alleged. Is that what protesters were doing? And two, and more importantly, has the secretary or anyone from the Trump administration reached out to you directly, personally, asking you, or at least telling you that they're coming to town and wanting to meet with you and discuss any of this with you?
Well, first of all, she has no idea what she's talking about. The Trump administration, they are completely delusional right now. And what they are promulgating in this particular moment are not just unconstitutional measures, but they're dangerous and reckless, and it's antithetical to who we are as a nation. You know, what I've done in the city of Chicago, I've signed 2 sweeping executive orders, one to make sure that the residents of this city know their rights and that there's real clear engagement with our law enforcement, not wearing any masks, being identifiable, and being also very clear about protecting the rights of all of our residents. The second thing is we made sure that we're protecting the right to protest. This is something that's fundamental to our democracy, the peacefully assembling of individuals to petition their government to do right by the people of this nation is something that is fundamental, and it's part of the bedrock of our nation. When it comes to black, brown, white, Asian, working class people, this president has not only been a disappointment, but again, he has worked hard to relitigate the Civil War. And we're not going to stand for it. But she has no idea what she's talking about. And there are protests that are happening all over the country that are demanding justice in this moment.
Have you heard from anyone? Have you heard from the secretary? Have you heard from the president?
No.
Has anyone talked to you directly?
No,
No
they
one
have
at all.
not.
Okay.
They don't communicate with us. In fact, I'm in regular conversations with mayors across this country, and whether it's Karen Bass in Los Angeles, whether it's Andre Dickens in Atlanta, as you know, that our resources are being threatened in our respective cities because we're actually investing in. This president is not interested in communicating with those of us who are on the ground every single day, and we know what it takes to govern our cities, and we're doing all the good work, right? Our investments have led to some of the greatest declines in violence across this city and across this country. This president
We have
is
those stats.
unserious.
Let's put them up on the screen.
Yeah, so 30% reduction in homicides, 35% reduction in shootings and shooting victims. Violent crime is down as a whole over 20%. In fact, we had the fewest amount of homicides in the summer since 1965, one of the safest summers we've had in over a generation. This is not about deportation. This is not about community safety. This is, quite frankly, this is about for profit. We know that there is an investigation right now that's underway with Tom Homan, who took $50,000 from 2 FBI agents because Tom Homan made a promise to direct contracts to the very people who are running these detention centers who actually gave over almost $3 million to President Trump's campaign. The President of the United States of America has declared war on poor people. And if there was ever a time for working people to stand up across this world, the time is now.
Mayor, I want to ask you about comments from another high-level official in the administration. This was President Trump, who spoke to a gathering of the nation's top military commanders earlier this week. If we can give a listen, I want to ask you about his comments on the other side.
It seems that the ones that are run by the radical left Democrats, what they've done to San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, they're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war, too. It's a war from within. It's really a very important mission. And I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military, because we're going into Chicago very soon.
How are you going to ensure that Chicago is not used as a training ground for the U.S. military? And what was your reaction to Trump's speech when you heard it this week?
A double-minded man. He is unstable in every way possible, unhinged and unhealthy. The idea of describing the American people as enemies from within is clearly not just a sign of authoritarianism. He has totally imbibed the full spirit of tyranny. And our cities are not training ground for the military. In fact, even the notion to suggest that the brave women and men who sign up to serve this country, to fight terrorism around the globe, to protect our way of existence, turning neighbors on their own neighbors, is not only unconstitutional, it is reprehensible. And so what I'm going to do is what I've been doing. I'm going to use every single tool that is available to me to protect working people in this city, to ensure that our fundamental rights are protected, to make sure that people know their rights, and then to ensure that we're actually investing in people so that they can live healthy and vibrant lives. That's what the people of Chicago ask of me every single day. No one has ever asked me to go to the White House and to express a desire for the military to occupy cities. No one has ever raised that. And so what they have asked for is to make sure that this president is not cutting food and medicine and housing. What? I'm sorry, what's that?
Have you approached the White House for a meeting?
Well, here's what we've made very clear to the White House. Invest in violence prevention. They took over $800 million away from violence prevention programs. They cut the ATF budget by 30%. Just a few months ago, working with my local police department, we took over 170 high-powered weapons off the streets of Chicago. Well, this administration cut over 1,400 of those ATF positions. We said, make sure that we are funding our education system. Look, if you look at everything that this president is cutting, he is literally cutting resources and services from everything that descendants of slaves fought for. education, housing, transportation, healthcare, good paying jobs. This president has declared war on poor people, and it's going to be working people that are going to lead the charge to transform this country and to push back against tyranny. This is the time now. And I'm calling every single resident, not just in the city of Chicago, to express their voices in very emphatic terms. We have been under siege by this administration, and it's going to be the power of the people, the power of working people across this country to lead a transformation in this moment to make sure that we're protecting our democracy and protecting our humanity.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned the resources being pulled back. The director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, who everyone here knows, there's a tweet from Friday. $2.1 billion in Chicago infrastructure projects, specifically the Red Line extension and the Red and Purple modernization project, have been put on hold to ensure funding is not flowing via race-based contracting. More info to come soon from USDOT, that's the Department of Transportation. Are you, and you talked about, fighting and you guys being on the front lines, are you guys suing the federal government for doing this? What is your recourse here?
We're definitely going to use every single tool that's available to us.
Is that a lawsuit?
That includes the courts. Absolutely. Look, we have been fighting for investments in our transportation system, particularly our Red Line, that hits the south side of Chicago for over 50 years. Well, under my administration, we finally delivered, working with our congressional delegation, and we have a strong Illinois congressional delegation that secured the $2 billion to extend the Red Line to the south side of Chicago so that the residents of the south side of Chicago can access our economy. And for this president and his administration to withhold those dollars while at the same time they're spending billions of dollars to undermine farmers in our country, billions of dollars to nations that are starving children right now. And so the world that is in upheaval right now, this president is exacerbating it. And the fact of the matter is that he is more interested in funding wars than the west and south sides of Chicago or urban centers across this country. And so, yes, I'm going to use every tool that's available to me to make sure that the south side of Chicago, we will not be ignored, and that cities across America, we're going to stand up and fight to make sure that working people and our values are upheld.
Mayor Johnson, real quickly, because we are way out of time, but I want to show you this poll from the New York Times Siena. Do you think Donald Trump's actions sending National Guard troops into big cities have gone too far? 53% of those surveyed said yes. Real fast, do you think President Trump even cares what the American people think?
No, he does not. Masked men going into people's homes in the middle of the night, pointing long guns in the faces of black and brown and working people and poor people is unconstitutional, reprehensible. And in the city of Chicago, we're going to fight back.
And I want to begin this hour by setting a scene. Quote, "We're under siege. We're being invaded by our own military," end quote. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking those were words describing North Korea. But they came from a witness describing a scene unfolding in Chicago this week. Those were the words of a man named Daryl Ballard speaking to the ABC affiliate in Chicago. Earlier this week, federal agents stormed an apartment complex in the South Shore neighborhood of Chicago. Witnesses say residents were separated into groups and led to vans, according to several witnesses who spoke with ABC 7. This came with a military-style name. The Trump administration called it Operation Midway Blitz. One woman, distraught from seeing her children herded into vans, from seeing children herded into vans, told ABC 7 that she pleaded for the agents to find their morality. Quote, "That's all I keep asking," she said. "Where's the human?" In response to her pleas, she said one of the officers laughed and said, "F them kids." Later, we'd learned that this show of force resulted in 37 valid arrests, according to CNN, citing a Department of Homeland Security memo. But meanwhile, the debris and the wreckage left behind resembled the aftermath of a military invasion. Personal belongings destroyed, electronics missing, birth certificates and other belongings scattered throughout the hallways like the ruins of a battle. Tuesday, September 30th, 2025, will be remembered as one of the darkest days in modern American history, right up there alongside the worst civil rights era atrocities where we were raised to believe belong to the past. All of this unfolded just hours before Donald Trump told a room full of America's top generals and admirals that American cities should be used as training grounds for them. Generals and admirals flown in from every corner of the globe only to be told their new mission is not adversaries like China or Russia or even terrorism. Their new mission is us, the American people, the so-called enemy within. In the 249 years of our republic, this week, this speech was our democracy's Rubicon moment. The expression crossing the Rubicon, coined to describe Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon River on January the 10th in the year 49 BC in violation of Roman law, may one day fall into disuse, replaced by Operation Midway Blitz, September 30th, 2025, to describe a day when a country's military turns inward. Before Trump's remarks, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, strutted on stage, pacing, ranting, calling out fat generals, degrading women in combat, railing against dudes in dresses. It was nuts. But one overlooked line from his speech demands some special attention. The self-proclaimed devout Christian looked at all those credentialed generals and admirals in front of him and said to them, "You kill for a living," as if he were a proud father praising his son's accomplishments. Most generals and admirals would never characterize their service in that way. Most soldiers and sailors, in fact, have never killed anyone, and those who have grapple with PTSD. The goal of joining the U.S. military is to defend, not to kill. Taking a life during combat is not something to be reduced to a boast. It's a grave responsibility, one carried with weight and often lasting trauma. Reducing military service to a Neanderthal war cry reveals more about Hegseth, who likes to call himself the Secretary of War these days, than it does about the actual proud U.S. military that he claims to head, the one that's made up of both men and women. But let's be clear, Hegseth is a sideshow at best. The libertarian scholar Tom G. Palmer put it best, quote, "Hegseth will be purged eventually, like others who create dictatorships for megalomaniacs. He's too stupid to know it." Or as the former Bush administration official and McCain campaign advisor Steve Schmidt put it, quote, "Pete Hegseth is contaminating the military with his radical proselytizing of extremist Christian nationalist poison. It is an acid on the military of the great republic and a volunteer force. There has never been a more unfit Secretary of War in American history." Steve, of course, puts Secretary of War in quotes because that's what Hegseth has now taken to calling himself. Hegseth's performance aside, the entire point of that disgraceful day, men and women with decades of service yanked from their posts around the globe at taxpayer expense, was to condition America, to condition its generals to accept the unacceptable, to treat their fellow citizens as the enemy within. Citizens they are sworn to defend. Just days before Donald Trump's speech to America's generals, he issued an executive order naming ideas themselves as suspicious. He also empowered the Attorney General to label groups domestic terrorist organizations, a thing for which there is no underlying law and hence no associated judicial process. How convenient. He is criminalizing dissent, ideology by ideology, belief by belief. According to Steve Schmidt, quote, "Donald Trump's speech promises to turn American soldiers into murderers and killers of American citizens in American cities where the American parents who raised many of those soldiers live and reside. What Donald Trump promised is an American Tiananmen Square." And he looked at America's generals and admirals and he said, "You are going to do it on my order," end quote. Trump is clearly done hiding his authoritarian ambitions. Cleta Mitchell, a former Trump lawyer who aided him in trying to overturn the 2020 election, said as recently as September on a podcast that Trump might, quote, "exercise some emergency powers to protect the federal elections going forward," end quote. The Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 was meant to keep the U.S. military out of domestic law enforcement, to stop presidents from using troops as a personal police force. The Insurrection Act of 1807 was written as a narrow exception, allowing deployments only in extraordinary cases like invasions or true insurrections. Trump is now signaling that he's ready to invert that framework, to use the exception as the rule, to twist the Insurrection Act itself into a weapon for crushing political opposition. Similarly, Trump has stopped even trying to impress his own base, whose livelihoods he's keen on wrecking. Look at the tariffs. Farmers, 78% of whose counties voted for Trump are being wrecked. China bought $12.6 billion worth of soybeans from the United States last year. Since Trump became president, zero. Entire states like Iowa are watching their biggest market vanish. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley, Iowa's longest-serving senator, an old-school Iowa conservative, is now asking why Trump is bailing out Argentina, a country like America heading toward authoritarianism, while U.S. farmers, largely Trump's own voters, drown. Farmers don't want one-time bailouts. They want and need stable markets. Or look at healthcare. A Kaiser poll shows that even MAGA voters, 50% of them, want Obamacare subsidies preserved. Yet Trump's one big beautiful bill guts Medicaid and leaves families unable to pay for basic care. His contempt for his own supporters is open and brazen and on the record. All of this is to say that Trump knows full well that he and MAGA Republicans are likely to lose in a free and fair election. And he is showing us openly and in full view exactly what he intends to do. Use the military against us, rewrite the rules to cling to power, crush dissent by labeling ideas themselves as terrorism. They've told us we're the enemy. If they're not sugarcoating their actions and motives, why should the rest of us? Steve Schmidt joins me now. He's the co-founder of the Save America movement, host of the podcast The Warning with Steve Schmidt, and previously served as a senior campaign advisor for the late Senator John McCain's 2008 presidential bid. Steve, it is good to see you. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Good to see you.
Steve, I want you to forget everything I just said. I want you to forget this, because what you have been doing this week is telling Americans, do not be despondent. Do not lose faith. Do not shrink in the face of these absurd threats made by Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, because you think that we're in a strong position to fight back.
Of course we are. Abraham Lincoln pointed out that in this country, with popular sentiment, anything is possible. And without it, nothing is possible. And so the American people, at the end of the day, will have to make a decision about whether they support all of the things that you talked about or whether they will reject it. When you think about Pete Hegseth this week in the military, what a young officer is taught from the beginning of their service is they go to their men. They get out of their foxhole and go to the men. The secretary goes to the commands, doesn't order the generals to him to preen on a stage, reinterpreting the movie Patton in the beginning. And so all of the theater is un-American. It is an assault on the ethos, the values, the core ideals of the military, that Pete Hegseth, a person who is a living desecration of those values, was up there. The culture, more than anything else, values accountability. That's what those officers have spent their life succeeding at. Great responsibility with tremendous accountability imposed. And that's what Pete Hegseth is the antithesis of. But it's a dangerous moment. Stephen Miller at the Charlie Kirk Memorial event gave a full-on Nazi speech. It was Hitlerian. And since then, the threats have grown and the promises to turn the military against the people, including the obscenity of a military raid with men rappelling out of helicopters. Who were they? What force did they belong to? What agency? Were they military? They certainly weren't ICE. ICE doesn't have that capability or training to arrest 37 people. Time to wake up on all of it.